Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Listen to these findings from the Inspector General's report on the handling of the Clinton email investigation. Error of judgment, serious error of judgment, extremely poor judgment, and a gross lack of professionalism. Now, these are conclusions that were drawn, respectively, about the conduct of former Attorney General of the United States, the former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and FBI special agents assigned to one of the highest profile investigations in the Bureau's history. In my opinion, this is appalling, and the significance of these findings cannot be overstated. The report identifies missteps at every level of the Department of Justice, from our nation's chief federal law enforcement officer to special agents in the field. Director Wray, I have to say that I was disappointed by your response last week to the Inspector General report. And while you admitted that the report found errors of judgment, you took pains to emphasize that the report focused on, quote, a small number of FBI employees, unquote. Well, let's remember who that small number of employees was. The director of the FBI, the deputy director of the FBI, the leader of both the Clinton email investigation and the Russia investigation. These were not junior field agents. These were senior agency officials. They were running two of the most important investigations in the Bureau's history. And they were insubordinate, grossly unprofessional in their communications, and even untruthful. So let's not pretend like this was some one-off problem. There is a serious problem with the culture at FBI headquarters. Your statement last week seemed to suggest we shouldn't worry too much about the events detailed in the Inspector General report because the report focuses on a small group of individuals and events. Well, I think that's exactly backwards. If we can look at only one or two investigations and find this much bias and unprofessionalism, I can only imagine what else is out there and what the Inspector General found about the conduct of senior Bureau leadership. I'd have to say he found out that it would certainly, in my opinion, be damning. Now, how can you assure Congress and the American people that you are taking seriously the problems identified in the Inspector General report when your very first public response to the report was to downplay its significance?
Senator, I don't intend in any way to downplay the significance of the report.
I don't think you do, but I'd like to know why.
Right. And I think the fact that the very first press conference I've held in my 10 months as FBI director was on this is a measure of how important I think this is. Start with that. Second, the steps that I've outlined that we're going to be taking are very significant, including, just as an example, but I could go on, convening every single SES employee in the entire FBI to come for a full day of training specifically focused on this is a measure of how seriously I take this. We're going to have the people whose conduct is highlighted in the report handled through our disciplinary process and held accountable as is appropriate. But my comments the other day are a measure of my view of the FBI. I don't have to imagine what happens in the FBI. I see the FBI up close every day, investigation after investigation after investigation, including in Utah, including in the states of every state represented up on this dais. And I can tell you that the conduct, the character, the principle that I see in those people every day is extraordinary and would be an inspiration to the members of this committee, and that was my point.
Okay, there should be no doubt that these errors cast a cloud over the FBI's handling of the Clinton email investigation and the investigation's credibility. Now, even more troubling is the irreparable harm to the FBI's reputation for neutral fact-finding and political independence. Where do we go from here? Now, you kind of indicated that.
Right. I think we start by reminding everyone in the FBI, which, as I said, I think the vast, vast, vast majority of the people who work there already know this, but I'm not going to leave that to doubt.
Okay.
That objectivity and the appearance of objectivity have to permeate everything we do. And that starts with, much as the lessons that have been described in this report chronicle, that starts with being focused not just on the result, but on the way you get to the result. That means following our processes, following our guidelines, following our long-established norms, to use the
Okay,
phrase in the report.
I accept all
Yeah.
that. Now, I want to thank Inspector General Horowitz and you, the FBI Director Ray, for being here today to help answer that question. I want to focus on two issues identified in the report. The first is improper disclosures to the media, and the second is the political bias evidenced in text messages between FBI employees. The FBI has a policy that strictly limits the employees who are authorized to speak to the media. This is appropriate for any organization that quietly investigates with an eye towards prosecution in a court of law rather than the court of public opinion. But the Inspector General found that this policy was widely ignored by employees at all levels of the FBI. The report goes so far as to describe a culture of unauthorized media contacts, including instances where FBI employees improperly received tickets, golf outings, drinks, and other benefits from reporters. Now, as you know, this is totally inappropriate. Director Ray, attachments to the report identify more than 50 FBI employees, 50, who apparently had unauthorized contact with members of the media. If the Inspector General identified 50 employees in connection with his review of this one investigation, a counterintelligence investigation no less, I'm afraid that the number of employees engaged in such unauthorized conduct across the Bureau is likely to be far greater. Now, clearly, additional action is needed to identify other personnel engaged in leaks and unauthorized media contacts. I'm not interested in hearing about additional training, which is certainly necessary, but not sufficient. Director Ray, what are you doing to identify those who violate the FBI's policy, and what consequences will those employees face?
So a couple things we're doing that I'll mention. First, we, in addition to creating a new policy to make it painfully and crystally clear so no one can have an excuse that they don't know what the rules are, I put in place a new policy in November. Second, we've created a dedicated leak investigation unit inside the Bureau specifically focused to ensure that those investigations have priority. Third, we have an insider threat center that we've elevated to the assistant director level that's focused on pulling together all that, because these kinds of issues raise insider threat type concerns from my view. I've also asked the head of our OPR to report back to me promptly about whether or not there are additional things that she would need to make sure the penalties are even more severe. And we won't hesitate to throw the book at people who violate our rules on this.
Okay, thank you. I think my time is up.
Senator Leahy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.